Hello, friends. This is Seth Itzkan with Soil for Climate. We're starting our interview with Courtney White presently. Let me just turn off this scroller here. We don't need to see that anymore. Okay, very good. Okay, everybody, welcome to the Soil for Climate interview with Soil Carbon Ranch and Quivira Coalition hero Courtney White. I can't say enough for me in terms of my own appreciation for his contribution to the world that is, now the Soil for Climate movement. But Courtney, thank you and welcome to our show.
Hi, Seth. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here, and thanks for the opportunity to answer questions.
Okay, great. So we'll get right to it. Just a couple of logistics. If people are having trouble hearing or seeing or whatever, make a comment in the comment field of the stream. Please feel free to share, of course, and ask questions. So again, just for some more intro, so this is Soil for Climate. We're a nonprofit organization advocating for soil as a climate solution or a drawdown solution. And it turns out that most of the soil on the planet is in some sort of grassland savanna ecosystem. And these ecosystems evolved with large herds of ruminants. And today, grazing done properly can restore soil and can restore soil carbon. So we're certainly advocating for that. And Courtney's been one of the heroes in that space. He started with the Sierra Club and then started his own organization called the Quivira Coalition. And in 2010, they hosted a conference called the Carbon Ranch, and we're going to put up a graphic for that in a minute. And I was fortunate enough to go to that conference, and it completely, really changed my worldview. This idea of ranchers and environmentalists working together for climate and soil and everything, it was wholesome. It was frankly a wholesome feeling. It made me feel good about the world, and it's honor for me to have Courtney here now. So Courtney, let's do the cyberspace high five. Okay, join me on that. All right, thanks. All right, so Courtney, let me turn it over to you. Give a little bit of your own introduction. I'll take myself out of the screen for a bit, and let's go back to when you were with the Sierra Club, and what was the gestalt then, and then how your thinking moved and got into the Quivira Coalition. Okay, and I'll put up some graphics while you're talking.
Sure. Let's go back in time. It's getting to be a while ago, Seth. This is back in the 1990s. For folks who don't know me, my background is originally in the environmental movement. I lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and not long after we moved here in the early 90s, I got involved with the local chapter of the Sierra Club, mostly concerned about some national environmental stuff going on at the time, some assaults on environmental legislation. So I got involved pretty quickly, met a rancher named Jim Winder, who ranches in the southern part of the state. And at the time, in the mid-90s, there was a lot of conflict going on, particularly between ranchers and environmentalists. You couldn't open a newspaper, it seemed like, without seeing a headline about someone shouting at someone else. These was the early days of the red-blue divide and some of the urban rural things that we've got going on today. But back then, it was relatively novel for a lot of us. And so I met Jim, and Jim did things differently. He had joined the Sierra Club. He actually became the chair of the Southern New Mexico chapter briefly. He was the only rancher, public lands rancher in the state that supported the Mexican wolf introduction, which was a big issue at the time. And he ranched holistically. I mean, he moved his cows around, bunched them up, moved them in the herd. And I had never heard any of this. And so I met Jim at a Sierra Club meeting. There's a cowboy hat on the table. And I thought, what's a rancher doing at a Sierra Club meeting? I talked to him. He said, come out to the ranch. And to make a long story short, we decided to form a nonprofit organization with another conservationist, Barbara Johnson from the Sierra Club. And the goal of getting kind of energizing what came to be called the radical center, meaning that all these groups had balkanized and all this bad blood was going on between ranchers and environmentalists. And yet there were pragmatic and practical, effective, on-the-ground answers to these problems. I saw them on Jim's ranch. Jim had grass growing, water flowing. He loved wildlife. He also knew more about the soil and plants and grasses than most environmentalists I knew, and that included me at the time. In fact, looking back now, Jim liked to talk about decomposers in the soil and the carbon cycle and the nutrient cycles, that kind of stuff that we now talk about a lot in the carbon context. Back then it was mostly above ground management. How did you move cows around to get lands restored and grasses healthy? So we started this organization mostly focused on range management types issues. We called it pairing common sense solutions to the rangeland conflict and trying to get around the bad blood. Radical center was a term that Bill McDonald came up with. He's a rancher in southern Arizona. And the idea that we have more in common than we have in difference. If you get down to the ground and start talking about land, kind of a wild concept these days where we seem to have more in difference than in common if you read the newspapers. But back then, there was a lot of common ground we found. So we began to work together in workshops, low stress livestock herding, holistic management, riparian restoration, kind of the whole deal. This was the early days of collaborative conservation in the West, which was really an outlier for the environmental movement. They didn't want local groups coming together and talking about stuff. So we took a lot of heat. The ranching community thought we were crazy as well. They can't be talking about moving those cows around like that. One leader in the ranching community said publicly that just rain more on Jim's ranch. I thought, well, okay, rain more. So he's got more grass. He can effectively use that rain that falls. So we did a lot of range management, common ground building, drought workshops, herding workshops, things like that. And then as Seth mentioned, things really changed a lot for me. One day in 2009, when someone sent me a publication. It was written by Sarah Schur. It came out of the World Resources Institute. I'm sorry, World Watch Institute, called "Mitigating Climate Change Through Food and Land Use." And I thought, what are you talking about? We've been working on the food and land use issues, and actually, Quivira for a while became a public lands permittee. We took over a grass bank near Santa Fe, kind of a long story, called a grass bank, the Valle Grande grass bank, trying to work collaboratively on these issues. So we got involved with producing grass-fed beef. We have an annual conference. I remember when we had Joe Robinson come to the conference the first time and talk about grass-fed beef. It was controversial. I mean, people in the audience, and this is a pretty progressive community, got up and said, "You can't be talking about grass-fed beef." Now, a lot of those ranchers became grass-fed beef producers. So we had kind of a similar reaction in 2010 at the conference that you attended. So I saw this publication, I read it, it said, it listed the things we could do to build soil carbon up and then soak up CO2 out of the atmosphere, the kind of things that this group, this Facebook group has been talking about for years now. And it went down the list. It was build soil carbon, restore degraded ecosystems, manage livestock for land health, those kinds of things. And we were doing those anyway. I didn't realize I had a climate connection. So I did a bunch of research, came up with the idea of kind of a carbon ranch. I didn't invent that term. I heard it from someone else. And then put this conference together in 2010, where I invited lots of folks that you know, Abe Collins and John Wick and Jeffrey Creek to come out, Sarah Schur, to talk about carbon sequestration in soils. Really, nobody had heard about it at the time. Yeah, we took some heat for it. You can't be talking about climate change. You can't be talking about these things, Courtney. And so we talked about mostly through drought management and building resilience in these systems. And then I ended up writing a book about it called Grass Soil Hope. There were two other books that came out at the same time. Judith Schwartz's book, Cows Saved the Planet, and Kirsten Olson's book called The Soil Will Save Us. So 3 books came out within a couple really months of each other, 2013, 2014. Still kind of outlier. What are you talking about? Soil, cows, creeks, carbon. And now fast forward to today, and I noticed that you've got almost 15,000 people on your Facebook site, and that is really a testament to how this idea has taken off. Seth, you and I went to the Paris Climate Conference in 2015, where the agricultural community there adopted soil carbon as a target for climate mitigation, which was big news at the time. And now you can't really turn around these days without talking about soil carbon, soil sequestration, regenerative agriculture. It's great. It's exciting. So I feel proud, a little bit like a proud parent for having done a little, my small part in helping this effort go forward. And it's neat to see it all take off now.
Courtney, thank you for that introduction. And you should feel like a proud parent, for sure. You are. And I'm a nephew in the organization, or whatever, you know.
One of many parents, by the way.
With whatever metaphor you want to use here. But I want to bring up a couple of graphics for you to speak to, so people can see. This, I believe, is the original board of the Quivira coalition, and just speak. I just love that picture. Speak for a minute about that. I'm going to take myself out of the frame here.
So Quivira was founded in 1997, which feels like a million years ago now. But back then, the idea of ranchers and environmentalists working together was pretty crazy. So when we put our board together, originally, this is the original board, we put on 3 ranchers, 3 environmentalists, and 3 public lands managers. One of them was a scientist. And the idea was that we have more in common than we have in difference if you get down and start talking about grass and water and soil. And so we wanted to walk that talk, and we wanted to bring those ranchers and those environmentalists, which I'm one, and there's Barbara Johnson's there, as well as Dan Daggett, which may be familiar to some folks. Dan was an award-winning Sierra Club activist who became a very vocal supporter of the ranching community, of progressive ranching. And he wrote a very influential book called Beyond the Rangeland Conflict, came out in 1995, again, a million years ago, but it really kind of altered the debate at the time. And what's important about this is if you're going to have soil carbon sequestration on these rangelands, you have to work collaboratively, and you have to have innovation, and you have to have incentives for land managers to do these things. And you can't do it by pointing a finger at somebody and saying, thou shalt sequester carbon. So the collaborative radical center idea is key to this. And now we have the toolbox we need. We can talk about that toolbox if you want. That's been developed over 20, 25 years. Alan Clavery gets a lot of credit for that, including all the ranchers who worked with Alan over the years. And now we have a huge goal, which is to help deal with the climate crisis. And it's been neat to watch and exciting to be part
of. Courtney, thank you. And let me just bring up another quick graphic here for people to see, because this really changed me, you know, pretty significantly. This, just the graphic itself, and if you would talk about it a little bit. So this was the graphic that accompanied the conference in 2010, right? The Quivira Coalition Conference, called the Carbon Ranch. Just give us a little, you know, bit of the background of the graphic itself. You know, how did it even come to
Sure.
be? I'm going to take your visual off here, but your audio will still be on.
Oh, yeah, sure. And so when we decided to put on the conference, and I got the idea of a kind of a carbon ranch, I literally sat down at the dining room table here in my house and tried to think of every regenerative, resilient, sustainable, holistic, progressive land management practice I could think of and put it on one map. And the idea was that all these things are part of the solution, and that literally we are on that map somewhere. Everybody is. And so whether you're a rancher or an environmentalist or a hiker, a biologist, or a food eater, a farmer, it's all on that map. And that's what I tried to do. There's no land divisions. It goes from kind of wild on the left-hand side to semi-wild to cultivated on the right. And the idea being that it's all one land. We're all in the same canoe here, paddling. And so what you see there, and a friend of mine, Joni Hallmark, did the artwork on it. What you see there is, at the time, this map can be enlarged now, expanded. There's new stuff coming on all the time. So you have holistic ranch management, you got creek restoration. Quivira did a lot of creek restoration over the years, fixing these degraded systems out west, which are pretty degraded. And one of the things to think about soil carbon is that when you have degraded land, it loses a lot of carbon from the land. So in some ways, if you think of a glass full of water, if you pour out half that water, you've got half a glass. Think of carbon in that context. You can fill that glass back up with carbon. That's the way these restored landscapes can be recarbonized. It's there. You just need to manage them properly for land health. And so this is what I try to put on the map, all the different things that kind of are in my mind at the time. We tend to pick out one thing at a time. We're just going to focus on cows, or we're just going to focus on farming, or we're just going to focus on farmers markets, when in fact it's all one landscape. It's all one planet.
Courtney, can I get you to maybe point in a virtual sense to different parts of the map, or just reference them so we can sort of look at them while you speak to it?
Sure. Let's see. Right in the middle is the creek. The different parts of kind of creek restoration. At the bottom is a wetlands. Wetlands are incredibly important. They're natural carbon sinks. You can build carbon faster in wetlands than you can almost in any other system. You got beavers. Beavers are incredible keystone species in these systems. On the left-hand side, you've got prairie dogs. At the time, prairie dogs were controversial. They're not. They're part of the system. If you manage them correctly, they belong there. You've got hikers. You've got bird watchers. You've got bat-friendly cattle tanks. We worked very closely with Bat International to help ranchers create bat-friendly water tanks. You've got the cattle herd. Again, as many of your members know, that this is about grouping cattle up like in a herd and moving them around the landscape so they graze holistically and timed grazing. So then you've got electric fencing. You've got above it, you've got different kinds of wildlife, bears. We can all coexist. Jim Winder, when I first met him, the rancher, he told me that he didn't worry about coyotes. His cows were in a bunch. The coyotes didn't bother him. They didn't. So he was totally predator friendly on his ranch. Then you've got fire in the landscape. Bringing back prescribed fire, important natural process. You've got food on the right hand side of that map. You've got the organic farm. You've got solar power, wind power. You've got the link to the city for the kids. We've got archaeology, because these landscapes have been used for many years. So we need to be mindful of prior folks who've lived on these landscapes. So all that kind of stuff all together in one vision here. I mean, there's the stuff now that's new, that's ongoing, that's exciting. This was kind of basically it in a nutshell for me.
Courtney, thank you for that comprehensive vision. A little bit of a background on me. I actually have a degree in studies of the future. I know some people are going to think, well, what's that? There is actually a program for a Master's of Science in Future Studies or in Forecasting, or presenting information about the future scenarios, if you will. And that drawing of the carbon map just completely summed up many years of education from my point of view and how to put an image for the future. And you just bang, it just nailed it. So thank you for that. We do have a question that came in regards to the drawing. It says, it's asking about agroforestry systems in the image of the carbon farm. And it does look like you've got some farmland there forest, agroforestry in the top left. Is that right?
Yeah, and so that's one of the things I would add to the map. Back when we did this, we're pretty rangeland focused. There are forests obviously in the west. The ranchers use, graze in. I just wasn't personally up to speed on a lot of the agroforestry types of things, especially silviculture, which is a combination of grazing in forested environments. And certainly now we know that agroforestry is a big part of the equation. So yeah, that's one of the things I would add back to this map is agroforestry, tree crops, kind of the work that Mark Shepard is doing, silviculture. One of the speakers at the conference, I don't know, Steph, if you remember, was it that conference? We had someone, a researcher from France come out talk about reforestation efforts in France. They've been working hard on it. They also devised solar panels that they put above organic farm fields, which is really cool idea to maximize solar power and growing organic food. So that would be something to think about. So yeah, so the forestry issues were not as prominent on my mind at the time, but they certainly are now. I want to make a quick pitch for a book. Not long after this, this book came out, I wrote a book called 2% Solutions for the Planet, and this is for Chelsea Green Publications. It was short profiles that kind of expanded this idea out, all the different things that I could find that sequestered carbon in soils, 2% carbon in soils. Yeah, there it is. Done by 2% of the population, which is farmers and ranchers, really for only 2% of their GDP, kind of a little bit of money. In there, you'll find forestry in there. You'll find more about fire and wildlife and some other issues that I couldn't quite squeeze onto the map.
Courtney, I know you can't see me, but you should be able to hear me. Just sort of nod if that's true.
I can hear you.
You can hear me. Talk for a little bit, if you would. Let me bring back up the Grass Soil Hope book. You know, when you wrote that book, what was the main thing you were hoping to achieve, and share for us some results from it, maybe positive or you know, or negative or whatever. You know, what was the impact that you saw, either that exceeded your expectation or didn't meet your expectation?
Well, the subtitle to the book is A Journey into Carbon Country. And the idea was that I myself was on this journey that I didn't expect to go on. Again, I came out of the Sierra Club, the Quivira Coalition, Rangeland issues, and then suddenly there's this carbon element to it, climate, carbon, 2009, 2010. So I met some folks. They spoke at the conference. But they were doing really interesting things, particularly the Marine Carbon Project, which is the first chapter of the book. I went out there, and so the book is really kind of a story of how I explored this carbon soil sequestration equation step by step. So each chapter kind of takes the reader farther down that journey. So it starts with the basic idea that soil carbon is important. It can have an effect on the climate if managed correctly. And so that's largely about the Marine Carbon Project. And the next chapter is called Abundance. I went out to a farm in New Hampshire, Doran Cox, who's calls himself a carbon farmer, who's doing very interesting things out there. Then we talk about some of the science, the microbiology, Christine Jones, glomalin, which is a protein that's very carbon rich. You know, I kind of walk us through what is carbon. We haven't thought about it. It's really one of the most abundant elements on the planet. It's essential to life. Without it, there wouldn't be life at all. It takes all these different forms, diamonds, you know, interstellar nova, microbes. I mean, it's all, you know, it's really an amazing, amazing element. And it does this cool stuff on the climate side of it if we can look at the world through that prism. So really was looking at all these different aspects of life today through the carbon focus with an emphasis on land management. And at the end of the book, I speculate, how could we create a carbon economy? Meaning, how could we begin to pay farmers and ranchers to do this work? And I'm not an economist, you know, I'm just a guy. And so I took some guesses at how we might be able to pay, directly pay farmers and ranchers directly, not through, you know, third parties, schemes and that kind of stuff. Just pay folks. You can measure carbon pretty straightforwardly. They have now much better ways of measuring carbon in soils. So just figure out some sort of economic mechanism that you can pay folks to increase soil carbon. So it maybe a little dated in that respect. Things have really moved on. There's a lot more science. There's a lot more observational technology now for carbon. But basically, the land management issues are the same. How do you move animals around? How do you get grass to grow? How do you get water to fill these creeks back up again? So.
Courtney, thank you for that. Can you share for us both some success stories and also some failures? Because, you know, they say you learn the most from when things go wrong. You don't need to be specific or name anyone or any place, but just in terms of sort of in a context, you know, something that worked that exceeded your expectation, but also, you know, something that didn't work and what we can learn.
In the book, or just kind of in general?
Just in general, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, you know, one of the first lessons I learned that was a failure, and actually it's in a different book. It's in Revolution on the Range, which came out in 2008, which is more about range management issues. But when Quivira got started, Quivira did a number of demonstration projects. We didn't want to just hold educational workshops. We actually wanted to kind of do some things on the ground. So we actually cooperated with the state land office here in New Mexico and did a little riparian restoration project, where we asked the permittee to just manage his cows differently, and we put out riparian fencing to help them stay out of the creek. And what I learned, and it all failed, that we went back a couple of years later, and the creek had started to come back. Grasses were growing, vegetation was there, and then we came back one day and it was all gone. It was all eaten down, and it turned out that the rancher had sold the permit and moved away, and the next rancher in just didn't care about all that. And so that you can't force people to do things. You need to encourage them through positive incentives, meaning that we tend, especially coming out of the environmental movement, we tended to try this sort of top-down approach that, you know, thou shalt do this and that, or not do this and that. We found that you had to really incentivize folks from the ground up and do the educational work and that sort of stuff. So if you want carbon in soils, you have to figure out ways to encourage collaborative, progressive work on the ground rather than simply telling them what to do. And that can be done a lot through economics, you know, and making money is a good incentivizer. So we learned a lot from that, meaning that we just can't go around and, you know, kind of point fingers at folks and say, do this, do that. It's great, do this, it's great. You know, no, they have to buy into it, and they have to really believe it to make them to make a difference. Success story, well, there's all kinds of success stories. I mean, there's farms and ranches. Some are in the book, some are now in other people's books. One comes to mind is Gabe Brown's story in North Dakota, where he took a degraded farm in a crisis and turned it around regeneratively. Now he's doing all kinds of cool stuff. The carbon content in his farm has come up a lot. Gail Fuller in Kansas, same kind of story. There's lots of ranching stories from around the world. People have turned them around. And you know, Dorn again in New Hampshire with his farm. He's not just farming out there. He's connecting farms through computing and the internet and sharing data. I mean, it's pretty exciting stuff. So there's lots of stories about ecological restoration, which is key to this too. We've got a lot of degraded land out there. How do we work collaboratively to restore them? Well, we've got a toolbox there. We spent many years working with Bill Zedike, who's a riparian restoration specialist out here, getting these creeks back into shape using bioengineering principles, sticks and rocks and creeks, carefully placed. And there's a whole book about that Chelsea Green has published called "Let the Water Do the Work," if anybody's interested. So there's lots of success stories. The challenge, Seth, as you know, that there's lots of push pins that we can put on a map now, kind of things that are working. How do you link those push pins together into a larger picture? How do you scale this up so that it makes a difference? As you mentioned at the top of this interview, there's a lot of grasslands out there. We could make a big difference, but getting these practices that have now been beta tested, getting the scale is the challenge.
Okay, well, hold that thought. I want to come right back to it about incentives. You said that the best approach is to have the right incentives. So I want to ask you about that in a second. I'm going to ask you what are the best incentives, because the whole concept of carbon markets is becoming a big issue, as you know. We're talking about it a lot in the Soil for Climate group. There's a lot of movement now in this space. How do you reward land practitioners for ecological services? How do you penalize land practitioners who are destroying soil? Is soil carbon itself the measure? I'm not saying we have the answer, but I'm saying this is the conversation that's going on right now. We know there needs to be some sort of price for an ecological service, and it may not necessarily be showing up in the current market. And so, how do we get market parity? So we'll come to that in a second. But I also just want to put out some logistics. This is the Soil for Climate interview with Courtney White, the co-founder of the Quivira Coalition and author of Grass, Soil, Hope, and many other excellent books in this space. Also, just some logistics. If you can't hear, that's on your own laptop. The audio by default in any live video feed is muted, so you have to manually unmute it. And also, feel free to share this. Want to put in a plug for the sponsor for our sort of media outreach effort, which is Nutiva. They're makers of 100% organic CBD hemp products, and they have a program called 1% of Profits for Regenerative Agriculture, and we're very thankful for them to helping to support this. And if there are other underwriters out there who want to help with this effort, please be in touch with me. We can use it, okay? We certainly can use some sponsorship. All right, so
hey, can I make a plug for you guys? I mean,
sure.
You've got a lot of members. It's really great what you're doing. There needs to be a community out there, and you've got, I think, almost 15,000 members now, in just a few years, and that's huge, and that's great. I'm a writer. I sit by my desk. It gets pretty lonely sometimes. It's great that you've been able to put this community together, and if anybody out there can help you, that'd be great.
Okay, and also we do have the Soil for Climate hats for sale. You can go to our Facebook, our website, soilforclimate.org, and you can buy a hat, and that is a revenue stream for us. And of course, it's a fashion statement that you can't go wrong with. Now, there were some other questions that came in. So I did want to ask you about the incentives. What are the right positive incentives in your opinion? What are the right incentives?
Well, so when we got started, a lot of the incentives were negative, meaning that Jim Winder, in fact, the rancher, when we got started, said he was going to lose the ranch. And economically, he said, I was circling the toilet. I had to do something different. Desperation is a pretty good incentive. That's what happened on Gabe Brown's farm. So I really can't kind of overlook in some ways the sort of the crisis incentive. Now we got climate. There was a story in Politico, the newspaper the other day, about a bunch of farmers and ranchers in the Midwest trying to figure out how to deal with this wacky weather that's going on. The big storms, then droughts, and big storms and flooding. So they're actually looking now for practices that help them deal with these extreme events. And so there's, it's a negative incentive in a sense, but there's opportunity there for folks to come in and say, here are some positive things for the land that you can do. No-till, for example, or holistically manage the cattle, those cover crops, those kind of things, which are positive, but they're kind of built on top of a negative. We found in our work that it was a lot of folks needed that kind of little bit of a push at the other end of it in order to try new stuff, because a lot of folks are just kind of used to the way they do things, or their family did things, their parents did things. So trying to get out of that box, you sometimes need a push. And so there's that. The economic incentives, I'm not an economist. I don't know how this works. When we got started, there was something called the Chicago Climate Exchange. I don't know if Seth, you remember that. It was set up to trade carbon on regenerative practices. I don't quite know what the mechanism was, but it collapsed and went away. And a lot of folks had kind of bought into that. And then the CCX disappeared. And I think it was kind of related to the lack of a bill coming out of Congress back when. And so I think a lot of people sort of felt a little burned then about the market side of this. I think things have changed. There's ways to measure carbon. I don't know if that's actually the thing that needs to be traded or not. I don't know. I'm a personal fan of building soil carbon, and why not just pay farmers and ranchers for doing that? You can't pick a practice that builds carbon that also destroys the land, right? So if you pay someone to build carbon, they're going to pick a positive practice, whether it's cattle or sheep or cover crops or whatever, that builds soil carbon. I don't know if that needs to be a payment from the government. I don't think it does. I'd rather have the marketplace do it on your crops, your added value crops, your grass-fed meat, your organic vegetables. Put a link to it somehow, as some folks are doing beyond organic, that kind of stuff. So there's, Joel Salatin, the famous regenerative farmer back in Virginia, said once that if there's enough market demand, the farmers will respond, meaning that if there's enough pull on the consumer side of it, farmers will produce. And I think that's probably the key here is if there's more demand for these products, farmers and ranchers will step up and fill that demand. And I think we've seen that on grass-fed beef, which was nowhere 10 years ago, and now it's everywhere, it feels like, which is great. So I think if you educate the public and they understand the climate connection and they want an added value on their products to go to regenerative farmers, and then the farmers will deliver, as Joel said.
Well, Courtney, I really think that's the issue of the moment. How to use markets without too much, government involvement to get people to make the right decision. And I hope that Soil for Climate, frankly, is doing that. And I hope that the Soil for Climate members go out and pay more per pound for grass-fed meat, and just do it. Just create the market signal that yes, we're willing to pay more for this. And my vision of the future is someday you're going to walk into a supermarket and the aisles aren't going to be by what it is. It's going to be by how much carbon it's drawing down or what its climate footprint is. Imagine that you walk into the supermarket and the regenerative meat will by far be the most climate friendly.
Right.
And then all the other grain crap and sugar crap is going to be the most climate destructive. So just imagine if your whole experience of walking into a supermarket was walking through a display of what's climate friendly and what isn't. Okay, now I want to get to some fiction, if we may. People out there may like to know that Courtney actually writes fiction as well as nonfiction, and he has a new book called The Sun. And I want to bring in my colleague Carl here because he read it and loved it and has some questions for you about that. So Carl, just give me a second to set up the screen here. I'm going to take myself out, and you guys talk about Courtney's book, The Sun. Go
Hi,
ahead.
Carl.
Courtney, how are you?
I'm great.
Thanks for joining us today with Seth, and very proud to have your copy here. For those who don't know and are looking for an excellent holiday gift, I can't recommend this book higher. It's a great murder mystery with aspects of managed grazing thrown into it. So found it a truly enjoyable read. It was a nice respite from a lot of the books that I read that have indices and I'm always cross-checking reports and references. So it was just nice to settle in, to a novel for a change. And I would like to hear an update on how the follow-up book is coming along. And I don't know if that's been released or what the status is, or what can you share?
Yeah, so just to let folks know that I've always wanted to write. I write a lot of nonfiction, and I feel like you, Carl, after a while, you're a little tired of the citations and the research and the kind of heaviness of some of this. And so I thought, why not? I've always wanted to write a murder mystery. I felt like I had all the research done, meaning all the land management and the cattle and stuff. And what if you just put a dead body in a cattle tank? I just kind of go with the story. So that's what I did. And it's set in New Mexico on a big ranch in northeastern New Mexico, in a country that I know pretty well. And I just kind of took all the stuff that I knew, created a character who comes out and inherits the ranch and then has to deal with a lot of things that happen. And yep, there's electric fencing plays a key plot role in the story. And the goal was to have some fun, but also, try to impart some knowledge, maybe to a readership that is not familiar with some of these topics. It's the first in the series. I've actually got, I don't know, probably a dozen mapped out. I hope I live long enough to write them all. And I kind of want to cycle through these issues that we've been talking about. Eventually get into some of the carbon and climate stuff. Just starting at the beginning with kind of the land use questions in the West. And she comes out to sell the ranch and is sort of bombarded by oil and gas and real estate development, and she's not sure what to do. But to answer your question, the next one carries the story forward. It actually involves an environmentalist, something that happens to the cattle on the ranch, and I am about halfway through it. Carl, I wish I were farther. This ain't paying the bills, and so I got to keep doing nonfiction work, which I love, which very satisfying. But now I've started. I don't know, Seth has mentioned it, but I've started a newsletter. It's actually a weekly newsletter of all things. I'm just trying to get these issues out to kind of a wider audience. My children who are in school and college, I'm concerned about their spirits and their optimism, kind of. So I thought I'd write this newsletter. So that's a writing chore on top of everything else. But I'm about halfway done. It'll be out in the spring. These are self-published. I don't have a publisher breathing down my neck, which is a good thing, actually. And once I get a little farther along, I'll let folks know. But yeah, no, it takes the story through the cattle part, then we'll get into some wildlife issues in the one after that. So it's fun. It's fun to kind of plot this stuff out and think about. All right, so I got a dead body now. I didn't see that. So I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Courtney, let me jump in here just to reiterate what people just heard. This is a murder mystery that involves elements of holistic management. Okay, can we say that again? A murder mystery novel with elements of holistic management. This needs to be a blockbuster, friends. This needs to be playing at the Cineplex, movies 1 through 12. Okay, and in the drive-in theater. Is this going to imagine, who's going to be the lead roles, and is this the kind of thing you bring a date to? All right, yeah. All right. We need.
It's a family-friendly story, and yes, there's holistic management. There's a herd and cattle fencing. Electric fencing.
There you go. Sounds like
there's a pretty big plot element related to electric fencing, as Carl knows. Can't give it away. Can't tell you what it is.
Electric fencing. There you go. There's your movie element of a murder mystery. Electric fencing.
And I don't know if Carl agrees, but I think it'd make a great movie.
I do agree, and it's not it's not like even hitting people over the head with it. What I really love is just the subtlety of it. Like any number of times you had little clues woven in where one character says, "Oh, I have time to go move the animals." It's like, well, what is he talking about? Moving animals? I'm like, that's perfect. So,
well, really, so the main character is a doctor in Boston who comes out she inherits the ranch, so she doesn't know, and so she stands in for the reader and really stands in for me when I got started. And so that she gets to learn these issues along with the readership. Yeah, no, I didn't want to broadcast stuff because it's just part of the landscape. It's part of how this ranch is managed, like part of everything else that goes on.
Exactly, the way it was woven in organically is part of what I really, really enjoyed.
Well, thanks.
Now, Courtney, going to bring myself in here. Change the topic for a second, but kudos to you for doing nonfiction in this space. And really, if anyone out there knows a producer or people who are in movies and can suggest this book to them, because this is how it has to reach the mass media. People are going to be reading, soil, carbon, values the way Carl and I do. We're geeks, but the average person needs something fun, and this book could be it. Now, we have seen some other good questions coming in here on the comment, and one has to do with the presidential candidates. Without endorsing or dissing any particular candidate, how would you reflect in terms of what you've heard about this topic in general in the presidential campaign?
Well, yeah, no, that's a good question. And we should back up a little bit, that when Quivira got started, we were explicitly not going to do policy, politics, or lawsuits. You know, we wanted, as a nonprofit, we wanted to work on the ground, create this common ground between ranchers, environmentalists, and other folks. And that actually reflects my kind of worldview. One thing is to kind of people to work out on the land kind of what the novel was like. So as a result, I didn't follow kind of the political side of this or the policy side of this very, very closely. And that includes up to the kind of the presidential campaign. I'm not sure where the various Democrats are on this. I know that the last couple of weeks there's been more talk about regenerative agriculture, which includes holistic management. There was a couple of stories I saw, and actually they're in the newsletter, that I think Joe Biden was talking to Iowa farmers about regenerative agriculture. I don't know what his policy is. And there was a story in Politico just this week about a bunch of folks, former secretaries of agriculture and political folks getting together to talk about regenerative agriculture. I don't know what their various positions are on this. You know, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie. I know there's a lot of climate stuff that they have written about. Do they get the connection to agriculture? And to be honest with you, I just don't know the answer to that. If anybody does, they can pitch in.
One of the Facebook posters has said that the Sunrise Movement has just published a Green New Deal scorecard that includes an analysis of the candidates' positions. And then she goes into what the specifics are. I don't want to repeat that right now. People can read it in the comments. But so different groups are scoring the candidates based on agriculture but I don't know that they have necessarily made the connection between agriculture and climate. You know, those could still be like separate silos. Well, here's your position on agriculture. Here's your position on climate. We're trying to say, no, that's one silo. That's not different ones. And so people who are in the Soil for Climate community or know people in various political campaigns, you know, try to get them to cross-pollinate between the climate scorecard and the agriculture scorecard. And if people know representatives of any of the presidential candidates who can speak on behalf of the campaign, we would be delighted to interview them in this format. Carl, do you want to come back in here? Hang on. And please rejoin us. Sure.
I had the opportunity in preparing for our discussion today to take a look at a talk that you've given a couple of years back. And part of what struck me was about slowing down the water flow through nature. And in particular, two terms that stood out were, I think, sinuosity and effective meandering. And I just love the phrase effective meandering. I don't know whether you yourself had coined it or perhaps one of your mentors had, but I just love the, what it describes. Like it sounds almost like a paradox or something, but it's a way perhaps in which I would describe my own career, studying chemistry and working with electric cars and becoming a climate activist. And now here I am essentially promoting cows and soil, a path I never imagined coming on, but I would say it was, in my case, I'd like to think it was effective meandering. So just a metaphor that I can bring into describing my own path along the way.
Yeah, I can address that briefly. Actually, it's quite a long topic, but in ecological restoration out west, we've got these eroded streams. When they erode, they tend to erode straight. So creeks want to meander. I mean, that's what they do. Nature wants to dissipate energy when water moves. It doesn't matter if it's a big system or a small system. It wants to kind of dissipate energy. And actually, you know what? This makes me think. Somebody said once that Einstein or somebody wrote a paper about cigarette smoke, that when it goes up, it also is sinuous. It turns back and forth. So I think there's some sort of principle in nature about kind of losing energy as you do or going around things. So we met Bill Zedike, who's a riparian restoration specialist, and he said when these systems straighten up, they channel down and the water table falls and all kinds of things come apart. So you got to re-meander these systems, and that's what we spent many years doing. This gets a little technical where you put the rocks and the sticks and it uses the natural principles of hydrology and geomorphology and that kind of stuff. But it becomes a lot of fun to get in the creek and put these structures in places, and then the water hits it and turns, and then turns back and turns again. It becomes re-sinuous, and that's how we get the sinuosity of these systems. Water slows down, grass grows, riparian plants come back. It helps everything. It's great. So yeah, so maybe the metaphor is, instead of rushing pell-mell straight ahead and eroding through our lives, slow down a little bit. Let the water meander, let the grass grow, but still go somewhere. You're still getting where you need to go, and make yourself healthy again.
Another term that I appreciate, that I associate with your work, although I don't believe you're the one who coined it, is the notion of a radical center. We always think of the radical left or the radical right. But in identifying, in fact, there is a spot almost like in the middle of a hurricane, like the eye of a storm, where the different forces kind of balance out, and you come to almost like I don't know if halcyon is too strong of a word, but a reality that has the best of all of these different views, in one vision. For the way that you are able to bring together ranchers and environmentalists, I think it sets a great model for what so much of society has to do in different ways, and not to stray too far off the regenerative agriculture track. But I just think it's a wonderful model.
So just a quick comment about that, and I didn't coin it. It was coined by Bill McDonald, who's a rancher in southern Arizona. In the mid '90s, early 2000s, we spent a lot of time energizing the Radical Center. This collaborative conservation movement, which really has spread across the West. It's a different era today, meaning that the entrenchment, the divides, the partisanship is all up big time from when it was in the 90s. There's still a lot of radical centrism going on, but it seems to be a little bit buried under the media avalanche of just kind of partisanship. And so I feel that the radical center is needed more than ever. And what we found was that you can agree on things if you put your policies, you put your positions to the side, what gun control is. So just put it aside and talk about grass. Let's talk about sinuosity. How do you get these systems more sinuous? How do you do it? And we can all work together. Traditionally folks came together to build a barn. Didn't matter who you were. Your community came together to build someone's barn. And we can still do that, I believe, around land and animals and food and water.
Instead of a barn raising, we have a soil raising.
Soil raising. Yep.
Hey, Courtney, I love that idea, and I know you can hear me, but I'm not on camera. Speaking of this sort of the conflict that we just talked about, or avoiding it, let's just talk quickly about this book that you wrote, Beyond the Rangeland Conflict.
Not me.
Oh, that's not you, but you sent it to me. Okay, but
I mentioned that one before. That's Dan Daggett's book. That's the one that came out 1995 that really changed the dialogue, because what Dan did there was he profiled about a dozen ranches that were ecological ranches, probably most of them holistically managed. And at the time, nobody had heard of all of this, and this was kind of a real breakthrough. And it was important because Dan is a pretty hard-headed environmentalist, and so when he saw these ranchers doing great stuff for the land, he had to write a book. And so that's it. And it's been reissued. It's still for sale, and it still holds up if anybody's interested in looking at it. It's a short, powerful book with some great photographs in it about just a different approach to looking at these rangelands. Now more widely known, of course, but at the time it was pretty radical and centrist at the same time.
Okay, well, my apology for that, but that's a good learning point that Dan Daggett really influenced you as well. And so in terms of the whole sort of evolution of the thoughts here, and then a lot of this goes back to Alan Savory, of course. And one of the questions that we had earlier for someone who wasn't able to attend, but they wanted to know, how do you think we can increase holistic management to the ranching community? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, that's a good question. That's a hard one. Yeah. What I found over many years, and this was a hard lesson to learn, I kept thinking, why aren't more people adopting these practices? Why aren't more ranchers, or why weren't more environmentalists coming on board once they saw the grass growing and the water flowing? Why weren't we enlarging this radical center more quickly? We had a lot of workshops, a lot of different incentives, a lot of kind of things we put out there, a lot of knowledge, a lot of data, a lot of information, and yet it felt like the pace of change was still pretty slow. And what I came to understand was that you really were talking about belief systems, and it was almost like asking someone to change their religion. And that's hard. I mean, you can throw up a lot of economic incentives, and some folks will go there, particularly if they're what they call early adopters, folks who are willing to make changes, or they're desperate or something like that, they'll make changes. But for a lot of folks, these are kind of like belief systems, whether it's ranch management or your anti-cattle, feelings, or they become pretty embedded in how you look at the world, and rationality sometimes doesn't work its way in there as quickly as one would hope. When I got started, I thought facts and data would be good, and they are good, and for some folks it made a lot of difference. But nevertheless, we still got into this kind of belief system thing. So then the question becomes, how do you convince someone to change the way they look at the world? And there's lots of different ways of doing that, but it's hard. I mean, it's hard. The one silver lining to the climate crisis is that it may push people along faster down this road than they would otherwise, and they kind of get over their belief in this or that and realize that if they want to stay on the land, for example, they've got to try some things differently. So then we come back to incentives. There's positive incentives that pull people along, or there's negative incentives that push people along. And we're going to need both. And unfortunately, the climate push is getting stronger every day, as we well know.
Yeah. One of the questions that came in Facebook asked about Eliza Greenman. Are you familiar with her?
About what? I'm sorry?
Eliza Greenman. Are you familiar with her or her writing?
No.
Okay. I just looked her up, and it does look pretty interesting. She is a writer in our space. Stories from an apple farmer. So we're not familiar with her, but thank you for bringing her up, and I encourage people to find out more about that. We are coming up at 3 now. It's been just about an hour. We like to keep these things to an hour. So let me bring in my buddy Carl. Any closing comments that you have that you want to share with us, or any points that you didn't get a chance to get to?
I would encourage people to join Courtney's, I don't know if he has a Facebook page, or if you could talk about how people can connect with you on social media. And of course, the Quivira Coalition puts on a wonderful annual conference that many people might be interested in as well. So I would encourage them to follow your work.
Seth, it's okay. When we're done, I'll jump on the Soil for Climate site and type in my newsletter address. That's the main way I'd like to kind of get in touch with folks. I'm now writing a weekly newsletter on all these different topics. I'm not heavy on social media. I got a Facebook page, got a website. There's a lot of information on the website. It's just jcourtneywhite.com. A lot of background material, essays, things I've been working on for many, many years. So if folks want to go there. But I'll jump on and type the newsletter address if that's okay.
One final plug for this terrific book. It makes a wonderful gift. The Sun.
It's on Amazon. just type in Courtney White and the Sun, and you'll find it. Yeah, it's cheap.
Yeah, and I want to put in a plug for that too, because the fact that it's fiction and murder mystery and it has holistic management and electric fences. Come on, folks, this is what we need for mass appeal. I also want to put in a plug for Soil for Climate. If someone can be an underwriter for this type of work, we would greatly appreciate it. We'd give you lots of nice shout outs. Nativa has been supporting us, and we greatly appreciate that. But we need more. And Nativa, they make 100% organic, regenerative hemp CBD products. We have the Soil for Climate hats that you can order online. We're all out right now, so you won't get them until after Christmas. But if you order them now, we'll greatly appreciate it anyway. Help with cash flow issues. Any other last words, or is it just time to say adios for now?
Well, the only final word I'll say is that it seems like every day we get more and more gloomy news about things, and so I'm personally trying to keep hope alive, to use an old phrase, and so that I like to tell folks there's a lot going on the ground level. There's really an incredible amount of stuff. We go back 25 years when I got started, there wasn't a lot going on. Now there is. I mean, it was small. Now there's a wide variety of things going on, which is great. Great news. It needs to scale up. We've got mounting challenges on the climate side and political side of things, among other things. But keep an eye on the grassroots. So there's a lot going on there, and that's what I'm trying to get across in the newsletter. Is there's hopeful stuff out there on the land.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. No last words from you, Carl? Then
the cows are out of the barn, you might say.
The cows are what?
The cows are out of the barn.
They're out of the barn. That's right. That's right. Okay.
The movement is going forward. Yeah.
They need to move. Okay. Thanks, friends, for tuning in. And we probably won't do another one of these before Christmas and the New Year. So everybody have a wonderful Christmas and New Year's. And we'll see you in 2020. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.